Mercy Colton had lost everything. Her home, her shoes, even her hope. When a mysterious rancher named Jacob Stone found her starving on the boarding house steps and whispered an offer that would change her life forever. But when a corrupt businessman arrives with forged contracts claiming she belongs to him, will one cowboy's promise of "stay with me forever" be stronger than the law itself? The icy wind bit through Mercy's thin dress like angry teeth as she pressed her bare feet against the cold wooden steps. Blood from fresh cuts stained the boards beneath her, each step a reminder of the 3 miles she'd walked today begging for work. The people of Cedar Ridge, Nebraska Territory hurried past her in the fading light of autumn 1867, their warm boots clicking on the dirt road while she sat shivering like a wounded bird. Her stomach growled so loud it echoed off the empty buildings around her. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Time blurred together when you were hungry enough to consider eating tree bark. "Please, ma'am," she'd whispered to the baker's wife that morning. "Just some old bread. I'll sweep your floors for it." The woman had looked at Mercy's torn skirt and tangled hair with disgust. "We don't hire your kind here. Move along before you scare away my real customers." Your kind. The words still burned in Mercy's chest hours later. What kind was she exactly? Poor? Alone? Desperate? All true, but none of it her choice. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders and stared at the small leather bag beside her on the step. Everything she owned in the whole world fit inside that worn pouch. A picture of her dead parents, a broken hairbrush, and a letter from her last job that might as well have been written in mud for all the good it did her. The widow Patterson had thrown her out 3 days ago for not paying rent. "I run a respectable boarding house," the old woman had snapped. "Not a charity for worthless girls." Worthless. Another word that stuck like a thorn. Now Mercy sat on these same steps where she'd begged the widow for more time, watching the sun sink lower behind the mountains. Soon it would be dark, and she'd have to find somewhere safe to sleep. The alley behind the general store maybe, or under the church steps if Pastor Miller wasn't looking. A group of well-dressed ladies walked past, their silk skirts rustling like leaves. One glanced at Mercy and quickly looked away, whispering something to her friends that made them all laugh. The sound was sharp and cruel like glass breaking. Mercy wanted to shout at them, to tell them she wasn't always like this, that she'd once had nice dresses too, before the orphanage, before the failed jobs, before the world decided she wasn't worth saving. But what was the point? They wouldn't believe her anyway. A horse snorted nearby, and Mercy looked up to see a man sitting tall in his saddle, watching her with curious eyes. He was older than her, maybe 30, with dark hair that curled under his hat brim. His clothes were dusty from travel, but they were good clothes, the kind that lasted. "You all right, miss?" he called out. Mercy's cheeks burned with shame. Even strangers could see how pathetic she looked. "I'm fine," she lied, not meeting his eyes. The man climbed down from his horse, his boots making soft sounds on the dirt. "Doesn't look fine to me. You're bleeding." She glanced at her feet and saw he was right. The cuts had opened again during her long walk. "It's nothing. When's the last time you ate?" The kind question hit her like a punch to the stomach. She bit her lip to keep from crying. Strangers weren't supposed to care. People didn't just stop to help unless they wanted something in return. "I said I'm fine," she repeated, but her voice cracked on the words. The man studied her for a long moment, and she felt like he could see right through her lies to the scared, hungry girl underneath. Finally, he nodded toward the saloon across the street. "They serve a decent stew in there, and coffee hot enough to warm you clear through." Mercy's mouth watered at the thought, but she shook her head. "I don't have money." "I didn't ask if you had money." The simple words hung in the air between them. Mercy stared at this stranger who offered kindness like it was the most natural thing in the world. Men didn't do that, not for girls like her. There had to be a catch. "Why?" she whispered. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Because somebody should." 3 simple words that made her chest tight with something that felt dangerously like hope. The inside of Murphy's saloon was warm and bright, filled with the smell of beef stew and fresh bread that made Mercy's empty stomach clench with want. The stranger, who'd told her his name was Jacob Stone, led her to a corner table away from the curious stares of other customers. 2 bowls of stew, Murphy, Jacob called to the big man behind the bar. And coffee. Lots of coffee. Mercy kept her head down, studying her hands folded in her lap. The cuts on her palms were healing, but the dirt under her nails told the story of too many days without proper washing. She probably smelled as bad as she looked. "So what's your name?" Jacob asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Mercy Colton." The words came out barely louder than a whisper. "Pretty name. Suits you." She looked up in surprise. "How can you tell? You don't even know me." Jacob smiled, and it changed his whole face, made him look younger, kinder. "I can tell a lot about a person by watching them. The way you sit, the way you speak. You've got manners, good ones. That doesn't come from nowhere." Murphy brought their food, setting down steaming bowls that made Mercy's eyes water with hunger. She forced herself to eat slowly, even though every part of her wanted to wolf it down like an animal. Jacob pretended not to notice how her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. "Where you from, Mercy Colton?" he asked between bites of his own stew. "Originally, Kansas. My parents had a farm there before they died of fever." She took a sip of coffee and felt warmth spread through her chest. "After that, the orphanage in Missouri. Then, lots of places." "What kind of work you been doing?" Mercy's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Here it came, the part where she had to admit she was a failure at everything she tried. "Housework mostly. Cooking, cleaning, mending. But She swallowed hard. "I never seem to do things the way people want them done. Or maybe you just haven't found the right people yet." The words were so unexpected that Mercy nearly choked on her coffee. "What do you mean?" Jacob leaned back in his chair, studying her with those storm-gray eyes. "I mean, maybe the problem isn't you, Mercy. Maybe it's them." "That's not how the world works," she said bitterly. "Poor people don't get to be choosy about who they work for." "Says who?" The question caught her off guard. "Says who?" Everyone she wanted to answer. Every boss who'd fired her. Every lady who'd looked down her nose. Every person who'd made it clear that girls like Mercy should be grateful for whatever scraps they were thrown. "You really believe that?" Jacob continued. "That you deserve whatever treatment people give you, just because you don't have money?" Mercy set down her spoon, suddenly confused. She'd never thought about it that way before. "I don't know." "Well, I do know. I know that every person, rich or poor, deserves to be treated with respect. And I know that anyone who can't see that isn't worth working for in the first place." His words stirred something deep in Mercy's chest, something that felt like the tiny flame of a candle in a dark room. For so long, she'd believed what everyone told her, that she was worthless, that she should be grateful for any kindness, no matter how small. But what if they were wrong? "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked suddenly. "And don't say, because somebody should. There's more to it than that." Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his fingers turning his coffee cup in slow circles. Finally, he said, "I had a sister once, about your age when she died. Consumption took her the winter I turned 20. Mercy felt her heart squeeze with sympathy. "I'm sorry. Before she got sick, Mary used to say the same things you're saying now. That she wasn't worth much, that she should be thankful for whatever life gave her. Made me so angry I could have punched walls." His voice grew soft. "I spent her last months trying to convince her she was wrong, that she mattered, that she deserved good things. Did you succeed?" Jacob's smile was sad but genuine. "She died believing she was loved. So yes, I think I did." Mercy stared at him across the table. This stranger who'd fed her and spoken to her like she was a real person, instead of just another piece of human trash cluttering up the world. "Is that what you're trying to do with me? Convince me I matter?" "No," Jacob said quietly. "I'm trying to convince you to convince yourself." The words hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly Mercy understood why this man scared her so much. It wasn't because he might hurt her, it was because he might actually help her believe she was worth helping. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Jacob's horse pawed the ground impatiently as dawn painted the Nebraska sky pink and gold. But Mercy stood frozen on the boarding house steps like her feet had grown roots. The leather bag in her hands felt heavier than it should, weighted down with all her doubts and fears about leaving the only town she'd known for months. Second thoughts, Jacob asked gently, adjusting the reins of the bay mare he'd brought for her to ride. Mercy stared at the horse, a beautiful creature with kind eyes and a gentle way of moving. She'd never owned anything so fine in her whole life. What if I can't do the work? What if I mess everything up like I always do? Then we'll figure it out together. Jacob's voice was steady, sure. Mercy, look at me. She lifted her eyes to his face, seeing patience there instead of the frustration she expected. Most people got tired of her questions, her worries, her need to understand exactly what was expected of her. I'm not asking you to be perfect, he said. I'm asking you to try. That's all anyone can do. The simple truth of it made something loosen in her chest. Just try. Not succeed, not impress anyone, not prove she was worth the trouble. Just try. Okay, she whispered, and let him help her up onto the mare's back. The ride to Jacob's ranch took them through rolling hills covered in grass that bent and swayed like ocean waves. Mercy had never seen so much open space in her life. No buildings blocking the view, no crowds of people pushing and shoving. Just endless sky and land that seemed to go on forever. It's beautiful, she breathed, forgetting to be nervous for a moment. Jacob smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. Wait until you see it in spring. The whole prairie turns green as emeralds, and there are wildflowers everywhere you look. You really love it here. It's home, he said simply. First real home I ever had. Mercy understood that feeling, the longing for a place where you belonged, where you could breathe easy and not worry about when someone would tell you to move along. She dreamed of having a home like that since she was small. As they rode, Jacob told her about the ranch. How he'd bought it 3 years ago with money saved from working cattle drives. How he'd built most of the buildings himself. How hard it was to find good help this far from town. His words painted pictures in her mind of a life she'd never imagined possible. What happened to your last housekeeper? Mercy asked as they topped a hill. Mrs. Henderson? She married the blacksmith in town last month. Good for her, she'd been alone since her husband died in the war. But it left me in a fix. I can cook beans and bacon, but that's about it. And the house? He shook his head. Let's just say it needs a woman's touch. The way he said it made Mercy think there was more to the story, but she didn't push. Everyone had secrets, things they weren't ready to share. She certainly did. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Jacob had packed, thick sandwiches and apples that tasted like sunshine. Mercy sat on a fallen log, watching clouds drift across the sky like lazy sheep. Can I ask you something? She said suddenly. Course. Yesterday, when you found me on those steps, did you plan it? Were you looking for someone to hire? Jacob considered the question while he chewed his sandwich. Honestly? No. I was just passing through town, picking up supplies. Saw you sitting there and something made me stop. What kind of something? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, You reminded me of a wild animal that's been hurt, scared and hurting, but still fighting, still alive. The comparison should have stung, but somehow it didn't. Maybe because she heard respect in his voice, not pity. I've been hurt before, she admitted, by people who were supposed to take care of me. I figured as much. Jacob's voice was gentle. Want to talk about it? Mercy shook her head quickly. Not yet. Maybe someday. That's fine. We've got time. Time. What a luxury that was. Time to heal, time to trust, time to become the person she was meant to be instead of the broken thing circumstances had made her. As they prepared to continue their journey, Jacob helped her back onto the mare. His hands were careful, respectful, and Mercy realized this was the first time a man had touched her without wanting something in return. What's her name? She asked, patting the horse's neck. Clover. She's gentle as a lamb, but she's got spirit when she needs it. Like me, Mercy thought, and felt a small smile tug at her lips. Maybe she had more in common with this horse than she'd realized. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon when Jacob pointed ahead. There it is. Home. Mercy followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. The ranch spread out before them like something from a dream. A white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a red barn that looked solid as a mountain, corrals where horses grazed peacefully in the evening light. It wasn't fancy, but it was real and beautiful and looked like the kind of place where a person could build a life. It's perfect, she whispered. Jacob looked pleased. It's got good bones. Just needs someone to love it proper. As they rode down the hill toward her new home, Mercy felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate kind that came from having no other choice, but the warm, steady kind that came from possibility. For the first time in her life, she was riding toward something instead of running away. But as they approached the ranch, Mercy noticed something that made her stomach tighten with worry. The front door of the house stood wide open, swinging gently in the evening breeze. And there, tied to the porch rail, was a horse she didn't recognize. A fancy black stallion with silver on its bridle. Someone was waiting for them. The stranger standing in Jacob's kitchen was everything Mercy had learned to fear in a man, tall, well-dressed, with cold eyes that looked at her like she was something he might scrape off his boot. His expensive suit and gold watch chain marked him as someone with money and power, the kind of person who could make problems disappear or create them from thin air. "Mr. Stone, I presume?" The man's voice was smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. "I'm Cornelius Hartwell. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jacob stepped slightly in front of Mercy, his body tense as a coiled spring. "Don't believe I know you, Mr. Hartwell. And I'm sure I don't have anything of yours." Hartwell's smile was sharp as a knife blade. "Oh, but you do." His pale eyes fixed on Mercy like a snake studying a mouse. "Miss Colton and I have unfinished business." Mercy's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She'd never seen this man before in her life, but something about him made her skin crawl with the memory of other men, other faces that had looked at her with that same hungry expression. "I don't know you," she said, proud that her voice came out steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Of course you do, my dear. The Hartwell Employment Agency. You signed a contract with us just last month." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "Right here in black and white." Jacob snatched the paper before Mercy could move, his eyes scanning the words quickly. "This says she owes you $300. For what?" "Training, housing, transportation. The usual costs of placing a girl in proper employment." Hartwell's tone was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. "Miss Colton left her assigned position without notice, breaking her contract. She must return with me to fulfill her obligations." "That's a lie." Mercy's voice cracked with panic. "I never signed anything. I've never even seen you before." But even as she said it, doubt crept into her mind. The past few months were a blur of desperate applications, interviews, and rejections. Could she have signed something without remembering? Could she have been so hungry, so desperate, that she'd agreed to terms she didn't understand? Hartwell must have seen the uncertainty in her face because his smile widened. Memory can be unreliable when one is under stress. But contracts are forever, my dear. Let me see that. Jacob's voice was dangerously quiet as he studied the paper more closely. "This signature. It doesn't look right. Are you calling me a liar, Mr. Stone?" Hartwell's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "That's a serious accusation. Just making an observation." Jacob folded the paper carefully. "Mercy, is this your signature?" She looked at the scrawled name at the bottom of the page. It was close to her handwriting, but something was off about it. The M was too round, the Y too straight. But how could she prove it? Who would believe a homeless girl over a well-dressed businessman? I don't think so," she whispered. "But I can't be sure." Hartwell clucked his tongue like a disappointed father. Poor child. The stress of her situation has clearly affected her memory. But fortunately, the law doesn't require her to remember, only to honor her commitments. "What kind of work?" Jacob asked suddenly. I'm sorry. What kind of work was she supposedly contracted for? Cooking? Cleaning? What? Hartwell's pause was almost too brief to notice. Domestic service, naturally. What else would a girl of her background be suited for? But Mercy caught the hesitation, and something cold settled in her stomach. She'd heard whispers about employment agencies that weren't what they seemed, about girls who disappeared into situations they couldn't escape. Was that what this was about? Where? Jacob pressed. What household? That's confidential information, Mr. Stone. Client privacy, you understand. No, I don't understand. Jacob stepped closer to Hartwell, and Mercy could see the anger building in his eyes. You're telling me this girl owes you money for a job she doesn't remember taking, working for people you won't name, doing work you can't specify. Does that sound reasonable to you? Hartwell's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. What sounds reasonable, Mr. Stone, is honoring legal contracts. The girl comes with me tonight, or I involve the sheriff. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Mercy felt the walls closing in around her. The same trapped feeling she'd had so many times before. Just when she'd found hope, found a chance at something better, her past was dragging her back down. I'll pay the debt, Jacob said suddenly. Jacob, no. Mercy grabbed his arm. You don't owe this man anything. I won't let you. $300 is the debt, Hartwell interrupted, his eyes lighting up with greed. Plus interest, fees, and collection costs. Call it $500 cash. $500? Mercy gasped. It was more money than she'd ever seen in her life. More than most people made in a year. That's impossible. But Jacob was already reaching for his wallet. I don't have that much cash on me. I'll need to go to the bank in town tomorrow. Jacob, please don't do this, Mercy whispered, tears burning her eyes. I'm not worth that much money. I'm not worth anything. He turned to look at her then, and she saw something in his face that made her chest tight with emotion. You're worth everything to me, Mercy. Everything. The simple declaration hung between them like a bridge she was afraid to cross. How could he say such things? How could he be willing to give up so much for someone like her? How touching, Hartwell said dryly. But I'm afraid I need the girl to come with me tonight as collateral, to ensure you don't change your mind. Like hell she will, Jacob growled. Hartwell's hand moved to his jacket, and Mercy caught a glimpse of metal underneath. A gun. I don't think you understand the situation, Mr. Stone. This isn't a negotiation. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Mercy could feel her heart hammering against her ribs as she looked between the two men, Jacob with his honest face and work-roughened hands, Hartwell with his cold smile and hidden weapon. She'd brought this danger to Jacob's door. Whatever this was about, whoever this man really was, it was her problem to solve. She couldn't let Jacob get hurt because of her. But as she opened her mouth to agree to go with Hartwell, Jacob spoke first. Touch her and I'll kill you. The words were spoken quietly, calmly, but they carried the weight of absolute truth. And looking at Jacob's face in that moment, Mercy believed him completely. The question was, what would Hartwell do now? Hartwell's laugh cut through the kitchen like breaking glass, but his hand stayed near the hidden gun under his jacket. Brave words from a cowboy who doesn't understand how the world really works. Do you know what happens to men who threaten respectable businessmen, Mr. Stone? Jacob didn't flinch. Do you know what happens to men who threaten women under my protection? The air between them crackled with danger, and Mercy felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and everything would fall apart. But something else was happening too. A strange new feeling growing in her chest as she watched Jacob face down this well-dressed snake without backing down an inch. Nobody had ever stood up for her before. Not like this. Gentlemen, please, she said, stepping between them with her hands raised. There has to be another way to solve this. The only solution is for you to come with me, Hartwell said, his cold eyes never leaving Jacob's face. Tonight. We'll sort out the payment arrangements later. Over my dead body, Jacob growled. That can be arranged. came a new voice from the doorway. Everyone spun to see a tall man in a sheriff's badge standing in the entrance, his hand resting on his gun belt. He was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that had seen too much trouble. "Sheriff Morrison," Hartwell said smoothly, his dangerous smile returning. "Perfect timing. I was just explaining to Mr. Stone here about the legal troubles he's courting by harboring a contract breaker." The sheriff's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in the scene. "That's so? And you are?" "Cornelius Hartwell, Hartwell Employment Agency. This young woman owes my company a substantial debt and has been avoiding her legal obligations." Sheriff Morrison looked at Mercy, and she saw something unexpected in his gaze. Not judgment, but curiosity. "Miss, is this true?" I don't know," Mercy stammered. "I don't remember signing anything, but he has papers. May I see them?" Hartwell hesitated for just a moment before handing over the contract. The sheriff studied it carefully, holding it up to the lamplight. "Interesting. This paper looks awfully fresh for something signed last month." "What are you implying?" Hartwell's voice had gone sharp. "I'm not implying anything. I'm observing." The sheriff folded the paper and handed it back. "But I've seen my share of contracts over the years, and something about this one doesn't sit right." Mercy felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe someone in authority would actually listen to her for once. "Be that as it may," Hartwell said stiffly. "The contract is legal and binding. The girl must come with me." "Actually," Sheriff Morrison said slowly, "I don't think she does." "What?" "See, I got a telegram this afternoon from the sheriff in Omaha. Seems there's been some questions raised about your business practices, Mr. Hartwell. Missing girls, forged papers, that sort of thing." Hartwell's face went white as milk. That's completely false. Malicious rumors spread by competitors." "Maybe, but until it gets sorted out, I'm afraid I can't let you take anyone anywhere." The sheriff's hand moved closer to his gun. "In fact, I think you better come with me. There's some folks in Omaha who'd like to have a word with you. This is outrageous. I have rights." "Yes, you do. The right to remain silent, for one." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his intention clear. "Mr. Hartwell, you're under arrest for questioning in connection with fraudulent business practices." What happened next was a blur of motion. Hartwell's hand darted inside his jacket, coming out with a small silver pistol. "Nobody's arresting me." "Gun!" Jacob shouted, pushing Mercy behind him. The sheriff drew his weapon with practiced speed, but Hartwell was already backing toward the door. "Stay back. All of you. Drop the weapon, Hartwell," Morrison commanded. "There's nowhere to run." "There's always somewhere to run," Hartwell snarled, his eyes wild with panic. "And when I'm gone, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man you are, Stone. Hiding criminals, interfering with legal business. The only criminal here is you," Jacob said steadily. "And we all know it." Hartwell's gun swung toward Jacob, and Mercy saw murder in his eyes. Without thinking, she grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the stove and swung it with all her strength. The pan connected with Hartwell's wrist with a sickening crack. He screamed and dropped the gun, which clattered across the floor. Sheriff Morrison was on him in seconds, wrestling him to the ground while Jacob kicked the weapon away. "Nice swing," the sheriff grunted as he snapped handcuffs on Hartwell's wrists. "Remind me not to get on your bad side, miss." Mercy stared at the skillet in her hands, amazed at what she'd done. She'd never hit anyone in her life, never fought back against anything. But seeing that gun pointed at Jacob had awakened something fierce and protective in her chest. "Is everyone all right?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Thanks to you," Jacob said, and there was something in his tone that made her look at him sharply. Pride. He was proud of her. Sheriff Morrison hauled Hartwell to his feet. The man's face was twisted with rage and pain, his broken wrist hanging at an odd angle. "This isn't over," he hissed at Mercy. "You think you've won, but girls like you always lose in the end. Girls like me fight back," Mercy said quietly, surprising herself with her calm tone. "And we're stronger than you think." Hartwell's eyes widened with shock. Clearly, he'd expected her to cower, to apologize, to act like the broken victim he'd assumed she was. Instead, she stood tall, the skillet still in her hands, looking every inch the woman who just saved the day. "Well said," Sheriff Morrison commented as he led Hartwell toward the door. "Mr. Stone, I'll need you both to come to town tomorrow to give statements. But for tonight, I think you're safe." As the sheriff and his prisoner disappeared into the darkness, Mercy sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The skillet fell from her numb fingers, clattering on the floor. "It's over," Jacob said softly, sitting beside her. "He can't hurt you now." "How did you know?" she asked. "About the sheriff, I mean?" Jacob smiled grimly. "I didn't. But I sent word to town this afternoon, asking Morrison to look into Hartwell's background. Figured something wasn't right about the whole situation." You investigated him?" "Course I did. You think I'd let some stranger waltz in here and threaten you without checking his story?" Jacob's voice was gentle but firm. "Mercy, you're not alone anymore. When someone comes after you, they come after me too." The words hit her like a physical blow. Nobody had ever protected her before, never cared enough to dig deeper when something seemed wrong. But Jacob had spent his afternoon making sure she was safe, even when she hadn't known she was in danger. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. "Because you're worth caring about," he said finally. "Because you're brave and strong and kind, and because—" He took a deep breath. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. Love. The word scared her more than Hartwell's gun had, because it meant trusting someone with her heart. But looking at Jacob's honest face, remembering how he'd stood between her and danger without hesitation, Mercy felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take that leap. "Jacob," she began, but he held up a hand. "You don't have to say anything back. I know this is all new, all scary. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Instead of answering with words, Mercy reached out and took his hand in hers. His skin was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard and kept his promises. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." And in that moment, sitting in the quiet kitchen with their hands intertwined, Mercy finally understood what home felt like. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Mercy stood at the stove, scrambling eggs and trying to pretend her world hadn't turned upside down in the space of one night. Her hands shook as she stirred, not from fear but from the memory of Jacob's words. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Love. The word had kept her awake most of the night, turning it over in her mind like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. She'd never been loved before, not really. The closest she'd come was the careful kindness of a few orphanage workers. But that was duty, not love. This was something entirely different. "Smells good," Jacob said from the doorway, his voice carefully casual. He looked like he'd slept about as well as she had dark circles under his eyes, hair sticking up at odd angles. "Just eggs and bacon," she replied, not turning around. "Nothing fancy." "Mercy." His voice was gentle but firm. "Look at me." She turned reluctantly, clutching the spatula like a weapon. In the morning light, Jacob looked solid and real and absolutely terrifying in what he represented. A future she'd never dared dream of. "I meant what I said last night," he continued. "But I don't want you to feel trapped by it. If you want to leave, find work somewhere else, I'll understand. I'll even help you get started." The offer hit her like a slap. After everything they'd been through, after he'd protected her and fought for her, he was giving her a way out, because he thought that's what she wanted. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "For me to leave? God, no." The words came out rough, desperate. "But I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you feel obligated." Mercy set down the spatula and really looked at him. This man who'd saved her from the streets, who'd stood up to Hartwell, who'd offered her something she'd never had before. He was scared too, she realized. Scared that she'd run, scared that he'd pushed too hard, scared that love wasn't enough. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began carefully, "about falling in love with me." Jacob's whole body went tense. And I think maybe I'm falling too." The words came out in a rush, like she had to say them before she lost her nerve. "I don't know what love is supposed to feel like, but when I'm with you, I feel safe. I feel like I matter, like I'm worth something." The smile that spread across Jacob's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "You are worth something, Mercy. You're worth everything." He stepped closer, and she could see flecks of gold in his gray eyes. May I kiss you?" The question was so sweet, so respectful, that Mercy felt tears prick her eyes. Even now, even after everything, he was asking permission, treating her like she had choices, like her answer mattered. "Yes," she whispered. Jacob's kiss was gentle, careful, like he was afraid she might break. But Mercy was stronger than she looked, stronger than she'd ever known, and she kissed him back with all the hope and gratitude and growing love in her heart. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I have something to ask you," he said quietly. "Something important." "What?" "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, simple and earth-shaking. Mercy's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Jacob, I know it's fast," he said quickly. "I know we've only known each other a few days, but I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to worry about having a home again. I want to give you my name, my protection, everything I have." "Why?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand. "Because you're my home, Mercy. You're the thing I didn't know I was looking for all these years." Mercy stared at him, this man who'd appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been too afraid to pray. Marriage, a real home, a future. "I don't have anything to bring to a marriage," she said finally. "No dowry, no family, no." "You have yourself," Jacob interrupted. "That's everything I want. But what if I'm not good enough? What if I can't be the wife you deserve?" Jacob cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't know had fallen. "Mercy Colton, you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. You fought off a man with a gun using a frying pan. You've survived things that would break most people. You're exactly the wife I deserve, because you're exactly the woman I love." The word love settled in her chest like a warm coal, spreading heat through her whole body. He loved her, really loved her, not for what she could do for him, but for who she was. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Jacob's whoop of joy was so loud it probably scared the horses. But Mercy didn't care. She was laughing and crying at the same time as he spun her around the kitchen, both of them giddy with happiness and relief. When he set her down, she grabbed his face and kissed him again, harder this time, pouring all her newfound hope into the gesture. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "When?" she asked breathlessly. "Today. This afternoon. I don't want to wait another minute to make you my wife. Today." Mercy's eyes widened. "But we need Pastor Williams and 2 witnesses. That's it." Jacob's grin was infectious. "Unless you want something fancier?" Mercy thought about fancy weddings, white dresses and flowers and guests who would whisper about how the groom could do better. Then she thought about standing before God and man and promising to love this wonderful, impossible man for the rest of her life. "No," she said firmly. "I just want to marry you. Then let's go find Pastor Williams." As they prepared to leave for town, Mercy caught sight of herself in the hall mirror. Her hair was messy, her dress was plain, and she looked like exactly what she was. A poor girl who'd gotten incredibly lucky. But for the first time in her life, she also looked happy. "Jacob," she said as he helped her into her coat. "What if people talk? What if they say you're crazy for marrying someone like me?" Jacob paused in buttoning his own coat and looked at her seriously. "Mercy, people are always going to talk. That's what people do. But their opinions don't get a vote in our happiness. But your reputation, my reputation is my own to make. And I'm proud to have people know I'm married to you. He kissed her forehead gently. Besides, once they get to know you the way I do, they'll understand exactly why I fell in love with you. As they rode toward town, Mercy felt like she was living in a dream. This morning she'd been a homeless orphan with nothing to her name. By evening, she'd be Mrs. Jacob Stone, with a husband who loved her and a home where she belonged. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming alive. "Jacob," she said as the church steeple came into view. "I love you too." His smile was brighter than the Nebraska sun. "I know you do, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." As they rode toward their future together, Mercy finally understood what hope felt like. Felt like home. The church bell was ringing 4 o'clock when Mercy Stone, Mrs. Jacob Stone, stepped out of Pastor William's little chapel as a married woman, her hand clasped tightly in her husband's. The simple gold band on her finger caught the afternoon sunlight, and she couldn't stop staring at it. This symbol of belonging she'd never thought she'd wear. "Mrs. Stone," Jacob said softly, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that." Mercy felt her cheeks warm with happiness. "So do I, Mr. Stone." The ceremony had been quick and simple. Just them, Pastor Williams, and his wife Martha as witnesses. No fancy dress, no flowers, no crowd of well-wishers. But when Jacob had looked into her eyes and promised to love and protect her for all his days, Mercy had felt like the most beautiful bride in the world. "Now what?" she asked as they stood on the church steps, suddenly shy. Everything was different now. They were husband and wife, bound together by law and love and sacred promises. "Now we go home," Jacob said, and the word home sounded different in his mouth. Not just his home anymore, but theirs. "And we start our life together." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Mercy kept twisting her wedding ring, marveling at how such a small thing could change everything. She was somebody's wife now. She belonged to someone and someone belonged to her. But as they approached the ranch, Mercy saw something that made her stomach drop. Smoke was rising from behind the barn. Not the normal smoke from a chimney, but thick, dark smoke that spoke of trouble. "Fire!" Jacob shouted, spurring his horse forward. They found the source quickly. Someone had set the hay barn ablaze. The flames were already reaching toward the roof, licking hungrily at the dried grass and wood. If it spread to the main barn where the horses were kept. "Get the buckets!" Jacob yelled, jumping from his horse. "Form a line from the well." Mercy didn't hesitate. She grabbed every bucket, pot, and pan she could find, her wedding dress forgotten as she ran back and forth between the well and the fire. Jacob had climbed onto the barn roof with a wet blanket, beating back the flames that threatened to spread. Neighbors began arriving. Word traveled fast in ranch country when there was trouble. Soon there was a proper bucket brigade, everyone working together to save what they could. But the hay barn was lost, they all knew it. The best they could do was keep the fire from spreading. It took 2 hours to get the blaze under control. By then, the hay barn was nothing but a pile of smoking ruins, and everyone was covered in soot and ash. Mercy's simple wedding dress was ruined, but she didn't care. They'd saved the main barn, the house, the animals. That was what mattered. "How did it start?" asked Tom Henderson, one of their neighbors. Jacob's face was grim as he poked through the ashes with a stick. "Didn't start itself. Look here." He pointed to something in the ruins, the remains of an oil-soaked rag. "Someone set this fire on purpose." Mercy felt cold despite the heat still radiating from the ruins. "Who would do such a thing?" "Could be anybody," Tom said grimly. "Drifters, maybe, or someone with a grudge." But Mercy saw something in Jacob's face that told her he had his own suspicions. "You think it was connected to what happened with Hartwell?" "Could be. Men like that don't usually work alone." Jacob's jaw was tight with anger. "And they don't like being shown up by a girl with a frying pan." The thought that she might have brought this danger to their home, to these good people who'd helped fight the fire, made Mercy sick with guilt. "Jacob, what if?" "Don't." His voice was firm but gentle. "Don't blame yourself for what evil men choose to do. This isn't your fault." But as the neighbors began to drift away, promising to help with the cleanup tomorrow, Mercy couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. Getting married had been the easy part. Now came the hard work of building a life together, and someone was clearly determined to make that as difficult as possible. That night, Jacob insisted on sleeping in the barn with the animals, just in case whoever had set the fire decided to come back. Mercy wanted to stay with him, but he convinced her to sleep in the house. "One of us needs to be rested tomorrow," he said, kissing her forehead. "And you've been through enough today." So Mercy found herself alone on her wedding night, staring out the bedroom window at the dark shape of her husband keeping watch over their property. This wasn't how she'd imagined their first night as a married couple would go. But then again, nothing about her life had gone according to plan lately. The important thing was that they were together, that they'd chosen each other, that they were building something real and lasting. Around midnight, she heard horses approaching. Mercy's heart jumped with fear. Were the fire-setters coming back? But then she recognized the voices. Sheriff Morrison and his deputy, making their rounds. She watched from the window as Jacob met them by the barn, saw the serious conversation that followed. When the lawman rode away, Jacob looked up at the house, and even in the darkness, she could see the worry in his posture. The next morning brought more bad news. Sheriff Morrison returned with a grim expression and a telegram in his hand. "Hartwell escaped," he announced without preamble. "Broke out of the jail in Omaha 3 days ago. They've been looking for him ever since." Mercy felt the blood drain from her face. "He's free." "I'm afraid so. And given what happened here yesterday, I'd say he's probably headed this way." The sheriff's voice was apologetic but firm. "You folks need to be extra careful. A man like that doesn't forget a slight." Jacob's arm tightened around Mercy's waist. "What do you suggest we do?" "Keep your guns close. Don't go anywhere alone. And if you see any sign of him, don't try to be heroes. Send for me immediately." After the sheriff left, Jacob and Mercy sat on the porch steps, both lost in thought. The morning sun was warm on their faces, but Mercy felt cold inside. Just when she'd thought she was safe, when she'd found love and a home, the shadows of her past were reaching out to drag her back. "Maybe I should leave," she said quietly. "Go somewhere far away where he can't find me. That way you'd be safe." Jacob turned to look at her, his eyes blazing with determination. "The only place you're going is wherever I go. We're married now, Mercy. That means we face whatever comes together. But if something happens to you because of me, then something happens to me. But it won't be because you ran away and left me to wonder for the rest of my life if you were safe." He took her hands in his voice gentle but absolute. "I meant what I said yesterday, for better or worse. Remember? This is the worst part, but we'll get through it." Looking into his eyes, Mercy felt her fear transform into something else: resolve. Jacob was right. Running away was what she'd done her whole life, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to build anything real. But she wasn't that frightened girl anymore. She was Mrs. Jacob Stone, and she had something worth fighting for. "All right," she said firmly. "We stay. We fight. We protect what's ours." Jacob's smile was fierce and proud. "That's my girl." But as they went back into the house to plan their defenses, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the hills above the ranch. Cornelius Hartwell lowered his spyglass and smiled coldly. The girl thought she was safe with her cowboy husband, but she was about to learn that some debts could never be paid in full. The real reckoning was just beginning. The attack came at dawn 3 days later, when the morning mist still clung to the prairie grass like ghostly fingers. Mercy was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard the sound that made her blood freeze. The thunder of hooves approaching fast, too fast for friendly visitors. "Jacob!" she screamed, but he was already moving, grabbing his rifle from above the fireplace as he ran toward the window. "Get down!" he shouted, just as the first bullet shattered the kitchen window, sending glass flying across the room. Mercy dropped to the floor, her heart hammering as more shots rang out. Through the broken window, she could see riders circling the house like wolves around a wounded deer. 5 of them, maybe 6, all with bandanas pulled up over their faces. "Where is she?" a familiar voice called out. Even muffled by cloth, Mercy recognized Hartwell's cultured tones. "Send out the girl, Stone, and nobody else has to get hurt." Jacob's answer was a rifle shot that sent one of the riders diving for cover behind the water trough. "The only thing you're getting from me is lead." The battle that followed was unlike anything Mercy had ever experienced. Bullets whined through the air, splintering wood and shattering glass. The outlaws, because that's what they were, she realized, hired guns brought in to do Hartwell's dirty work, tried to surround the house, but Jacob moved from window to window like a man possessed, his rifle speaking with deadly accuracy. "Stay low," he called to Mercy as he reloaded, "and keep away from the windows." But Mercy wasn't content to cower on the floor while her husband fought for their lives. She crawled to the kitchen, staying below the window line, and grabbed the shotgun Jacob had taught her to use just yesterday. Her hands shook as she checked the shells, but her voice was steady when she called out, "There's 2 of us in here, and we're not going anywhere." Jacob glanced at her in surprise, then grinned fiercely. "That's my wife." The word wife gave Mercy strength she didn't know she had. This was her home, her husband, her life they were trying to destroy. She'd spent too many years running from fights she didn't start. Not anymore. When one of the outlaws tried to sneak around to the back door, Mercy was waiting for him. The shotgun blast sent him tumbling backward into the mud, clutching his wounded shoulder and screaming curses. "Nice shot," Jacob called out, pride clear in his voice even as he continued picking off targets through the front windows. But the outlaws had them pinned down, and ammunition didn't last forever. Mercy could see the calculation in Jacob's eyes as he counted his remaining bullets. They were outnumbered and outgunned, and everyone knew it. "Stone," Hartwell's voice carried across the yard. "This is your last chance. Send out the girl, and we'll ride away. Keep her, and we'll burn you out like we did your barn." "Go to hell," Jacob shouted back, but Mercy heard the worry in his voice. They couldn't hold out much longer. That's when she heard it, the sound of more horses approaching, but from the opposite direction. A lot of horses moving fast. Jacob heard it too, and his face lit up with hope. "Tom Henderson," he called out, "and half the county by the sound of it." The cavalry had arrived in the form of their neighbors, ranchers and farmers who'd seen the smoke and heard the gunfire. They came over the hill like something out of a story, yelling and shooting, catching Hartwell's men in a crossfire that sent them scrambling for cover. The tide of battle turned in seconds. Caught between Jacob's deadly accurate rifle fire and the approaching neighbors, 3 of the outlaws threw down their weapons and raised their hands. 2 more spurred their horses and rode hard for the hills, leaving their boss behind. Hartwell himself was dragged from his hiding place behind the chicken coop by Tom Henderson and 2 other men. His fancy clothes were torn and dirty, his face pale with fear and rage. "This isn't over," he snarled as they bound his hands. "You can't protect her forever." "Maybe not forever," Jacob said calmly, emerging from the house with his rifle still in his hands. "But I can protect her long enough." "Long enough for what?" Jacob's smile was cold as winter wind. "Long enough for Judge Morrison to get here with that federal marshal he's been expecting. Seems the government takes a dim view of folks who traffic in human beings." Hartwell's face went white as fresh snow. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Jacob nodded toward the road, where a black carriage was approaching with official government plates. "Judge Morrison sent word to Denver 3 days ago. Told them all about your employment agency and the girls who've gone missing. They're very interested in talking to you." The federal marshal was a tall, serious man with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much of the world's darkness. He listened quietly as Jacob and Mercy told their story, as the neighbors described the attack, as Sheriff Morrison laid out the evidence of Hartwell's crimes. "Mr. Hartwell," the marshal said finally, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, and violation of federal statutes regarding human trafficking. You'll be tried in Denver, where we have proper facilities for men of your distinction." As they led Hartwell away in chains, he looked back at Mercy with pure hatred in his eyes. "This won't end with me, girl. There are others who won't forget what you've cost us. Let them come, Mercy said quietly, standing tall beside her husband. I'm not afraid anymore. And she wasn't. Looking around at the faces of their neighbors. Good people who'd risked their lives to help defend strangers. Mercy finally understood what Jacob had been trying to tell her. She wasn't alone in the world. She had a community, a family, people who cared whether she lived or died. It's over, Jacob said softly, pulling her close as the official carriage disappeared down the road. It's really over this time. Mercy leaned into his embrace, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally drain from her body. What do we do now? Now? Jacob smiled, gesturing toward the bullet-riddled house, the frightened chickens, the general chaos of their yard. Now we clean up the mess and get on with living our lives. As their neighbors began helping to board up the broken windows and restore order to the ranch, Mercy felt something she'd never experienced before. The deep, abiding peace of knowing she was exactly where she belonged. The war was over. The real battle, the daily work of building a life with the man she loved, was just beginning. And for the first time in her life, Mercy couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. 6 months later, Mercy stood in the doorway of the new barn, watching Jacob work with a young colt that had been born just after Christmas. The spring sunshine warmed her face as she pressed her hand to her growing belly, feeling the flutter of movement that still amazed her every time it happened. Easy there, Thunder, Jacob murmured to the spirited horse, his voice calm and patient. Nobody's trying to hurt you. The colt, black as midnight with white markings on his face, pranced and snorted, unsure about the halter Jacob was trying to slip over his head. Mercy smiled at the sight. Her husband had infinite patience with animals, the same gentle strength he'd shown her when she'd been just as wild and frightened. Maybe he needs a woman's touch, she called out, stepping into the corral. Jacob looked up, his eyes immediately going to her rounded middle. Even after all these months, he still looked at her sometimes like he couldn't quite believe she was real, that she was his. Careful, he said, as he always did now. Doc Peterson said I should stay active, not wrap myself in cotton wool. Mercy approached the colt slowly, her hand extended. Hello, beautiful boy. What's got you all worked up? To Jacob's amazement, Thunder immediately calmed at the sound of her voice. His ears pricked forward, and he stretched his neck to sniff her outstretched hand. Well, I'll be, Jacob said softly. He likes you. Animals can sense things, Mercy replied, gently stroking the colt's nose. They know when someone understands what it's like to be scared and alone. It was true. In the months since Hartwell's arrest and trial, he'd been sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, a fact that still gave Mercy nightmares. She discovered she had a gift with the ranch's more difficult animals. The horses that others called impossible, she could calm with patience and understanding. Speaking of understanding, Jacob said, slipping the halter easily over Thunder's head while he was distracted by Mercy's attention. We got a letter today. From who? The Women's Protection Society in Denver. They want to know if we'd be willing to take in another girl. Someone who needs a safe place to stay. Mercy's heart clenched with sympathy. In the past months, word had somehow spread that the Stone Ranch was a place where women in trouble could find help. They'd already sheltered 3 girls, runaway factory workers, an escaped mail-order bride, a widow with nowhere to go. Each had stayed just long enough to get back on her feet before moving on to build her own life. What's her story? Mercy asked, continuing to pet Thunder while Jacob worked. Her name's Caroline, 15 years old. Parents died in a mining accident up in the mountains. She's been living with relatives who, well, let's just say they weren't treating her right. Mercy felt the familiar fire of anger in her chest. How many girls were out there right now, facing the same hopelessness she'd once known? How many were sitting on steps somewhere, believing they had no value, no future? Of course we'll take her, she said firmly. When does she arrive? Next week, according to the letter. Jacob finished with Thunder and turned to face his wife fully. Mercy, are you sure? With the baby coming, and all the work that entails? That's exactly why we should help her, Mercy interrupted. This baby is going to grow up knowing that our home is a place where people take care of each other, where nobody gets turned away just because they're young or scared or different. Jacob's smile was warm as summer sunshine. Have I mentioned lately that I love you, Mrs. Stone? Only every day, Mercy replied, standing on her toes to kiss him. But I don't mind hearing it again. As they walked back toward the house, Mercy felt the baby kick, as if in approval of their decision. She'd been thinking a lot lately about the kind of world she wanted to bring her child into. A world where kindness mattered more than money, where people looked out for each other instead of looking away. Jacob, she said suddenly, what if we made it official? Made what official? This. She gestured toward the house, the barn, the whole ranch. What we've been doing, taking in women who need help. What if we started a real organization? The Stone Haven for Women? Or something like that. Jacob stopped walking and stared at her. You want to turn our ranch into a shelter? Not turn it into one, it already is one. I just want to make it official. Get proper funding from the church and the territorial government. Hire some help. Maybe build a separate house for the women who come to stay. The ideas were tumbling out of her now, faster than she could organize them. Think about it, Jacob. How many women are out there right now who need what we can offer? Hundreds, probably. Maybe thousands. Jacob's voice was thoughtful. But Mercy, that's a big undertaking. Are you sure you want to take on that kind of responsibility? I'm sure. And she was. For the first time in her life, Mercy had found her purpose. Not just to survive, but to help others do more than survive. To help them thrive. I know what it's like to have nowhere to go, nobody to turn to. If we can save even one woman from feeling that way, then it's worth it, Jacob finished. His eyes were bright with pride and love. All right, Mrs. Stone. Let's build something bigger than ourselves. That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencils, sketching out plans and dreams. A dormitory building that could house up to 20 women. Workshops where they could learn useful skills. Sewing, cooking, reading and writing for those who'd never had the chance. A small school for the children some of them might bring. We'll need to raise money, Jacob said, chewing on his pencil as he calculated costs. A lot of money. Then we'll raise it. Mercy's voice was determined. The church will help, and I bet the Women's Protection Society in Denver would contribute. Plus, some of the women who've stayed with us have done well for themselves. I bet they'd want to give back. As they worked, Mercy felt something she'd never experienced before. The deep satisfaction of planning for a future that stretched beyond herself. This baby growing inside her would be born into a world where their mother fought to make things better for others. That felt right. That felt like the kind of legacy worth leaving. There's one more thing, Jacob said quietly as they prepared for bed. Something I've been meaning to tell you. What? I got word from the federal marshal last week. They found evidence that Hartwell was part of a bigger operation, a whole network of people trafficking women and children. The trial is bringing down the entire organization. Mercy felt a chill run down her spine. How many girls do you think they? Too many. But because you fought back, because you refused to go quietly, they were able to trace the whole thing. You saved a lot of lives, Mercy. The words hit her like a physical blow. All those months of feeling guilty for bringing danger to their door, for causing trouble, and it turned out her refusal to be a victim had helped save others. I had help, she said quietly. I had you. No. Jacob's voice was firm. I gave you a safe place to land, but the fighting back, that was all you. That was your strength, your courage, your refusal to let them win. As Mercy lay in bed that night, listening to her husband's steady breathing beside her, she thought about the girl she'd been just months ago, hopeless, homeless, convinced she was worthless. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this sense of purpose. Tomorrow, Caroline would arrive, scared and alone and probably convinced the world had nothing good to offer her. But Mercy would be waiting with open arms and a warm meal and the most important gift of all, the knowledge that she was worth saving. Because everyone was worth saving. Everyone deserved a chance to discover who they really were when they weren't just trying to survive. The baby kicked again, and Mercy smiled in the darkness. "You're going to grow up in a very interesting house, little one," she whispered. "But I promise you this, it's going to be filled with love." 2 years later, Mercy stood on the front porch of the Stone Haven for Women, watching the morning sun paint the Nebraska sky in shades of pink and gold. In her arms, baby Sarah gurgled happily, her tiny fist wrapped around her mother's finger with surprising strength. "Look at that, sweetheart," Mercy murmured to her daughter. "Another beautiful day to make the world a little better." The sound of laughter drifted from the dormitory building, where 8 women currently called the Haven home. There was Caroline, now 17 and teaching the younger girls to read. Margaret, who'd arrived last month fleeing an arranged marriage she wanted no part of. Mrs. Chen, a war widow learning English while her 3 children played in the yard. Each had their own story of hardship, but each was also writing a new chapter, one where they had choices, where they had hope, where they had people who believed in their worth. "Mama!" a small voice called out. Little Thomas Henderson, not related to their neighbor Tom, but named for him in gratitude, came running across the yard. The 5-year-old had arrived with his mother 6 months ago, both of them fleeing a violent situation. Now he was healthy and happy, calling Mercy Mama and Jacob Papa, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What is it, Tommy?" Mercy asked, shifting baby Sarah to her other arm. "Miss Caroline says we can plant flowers today. Real flowers for the new ladies when they come." "That sounds wonderful. Did you ask Papa if he needs help with the horses first?" "Already did. He said the horses can wait, but flowers are important work for men." Mercy smiled at Jacob's words. Her husband had adapted to their expanded household with remarkable grace, becoming a father figure to every child who came through their doors and a protector to every woman who needed shelter. "Then you better get started," she said, ruffling Tommy's hair. "Flowers don't plant themselves." As the boy ran off, Mercy's attention was caught by a familiar figure riding up the lane. Sheriff Morrison, now a regular visitor who helped coordinate with other law enforcement agencies to place women safely. "Morning, Mercy," he called out, dismounting near the porch. "Got someone who might be able to use your help." Behind him, on a second horse, was a young woman who looked achingly familiar, the same hollow-eyed desperation, the same defensive posture, the same air of someone who'd learned not to expect kindness from the world. "This is Rebecca," the sheriff continued. "Found her walking the roads outside Omaha. Says she's got nowhere to go." Mercy's heart squeezed with recognition and compassion. How many times had she sat on steps or walked roads, believing she was completely alone in the world? "Rebecca," she said gently, approaching the frightened girl. "My name is Mercy Stone. Would you like to come inside for some coffee and breakfast?" The girl's eyes darted nervously between Mercy, the sheriff, and the Haven buildings. "I don't have money to pay for anything." "Nobody asked for money," Mercy replied simply. "We just asked if you were hungry." Something in her tone must have gotten through, because Rebecca's rigid posture relaxed slightly. Yes, I'm hungry." "Then come on. Let's get you fed and see what else you might need." As they walked toward the main house, Rebecca's eyes took in everything: the well-maintained buildings, the gardens full of vegetables and flowers, the sound of children playing safely. "What is this place?" she asked quietly. "It's home," Mercy said simply. "For as long as you need it to be." Inside, the kitchen buzzed with activity. Caroline was teaching Margaret how to make biscuits while Mrs. Chun practiced her English by reading a newspaper aloud. Several other women sat around the large table, mending clothes and sharing quiet conversation. They all looked up when Mercy entered with Rebecca, and Mercy saw the immediate recognition in their eyes. They all remembered being the frightened newcomer, wondering if this was too good to be true. "Ladies," Mercy said warmly, "this is Rebecca. She's going to be staying with us for a while." "Course she is," said Caroline with a smile. "Caroline Mitchell, and I'm pleased to meet you. You look like you could use some of Mrs. Chen's special tea. It cures everything from nerves to broken hearts." Mrs. Chun beamed and immediately began preparing a cup, chattering in her improving English about the healing properties of her grandmother's recipe. Rebecca looked overwhelmed by the welcome, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I don't understand. Why are you all being so nice to me? You don't even know me. We know enough, said Margaret quietly. We know you're here, and you need help, and that's all that matters. Besides, Caroline added with a grin, we were all new once, scared and alone and convinced nobody would ever care about us. But look at us now. It was true. Looking around the table, Mercy could see the transformation in each woman who'd come through their doors. Caroline had grown from a frightened 15-year-old into a confident teacher. Margaret had started a small sewing business from her room. Mrs. Chun was learning to read English and planning to send for her sister in China. Each had found not just shelter, but purpose. Not just safety, but hope. After breakfast, Mercy showed Rebecca to her room. Simple but clean, with a window that looked out over the gardens and a chest where she could keep her belongings. It's not much, Mercy said apologetically. It's perfect, Rebecca whispered, running her hand over the quilt on the bed. It's the first room I've ever had that was just mine. Later that evening, Jacob found Mercy on the porch again, baby Sarah sleeping peacefully in her arms. The setting sun painted everything in golden light, and the sounds of the haven settling in for the night created a peaceful symphony. Good day? He asked, settling beside her on the porch swing. Very good. Rebecca seems like she'll fit in well. And Caroline got word that she's been accepted to Teachers College in Lincoln. That's wonderful news. Jacob's voice was warm with pride. She's come so far. We all have. Mercy leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the deep contentment that came from knowing they were exactly where they belonged. Sometimes I can barely remember the girl who sat on those boarding house steps, convinced she was worthless. I remember her, Jacob said softly. She was brave and strong and beautiful, even when she couldn't see it herself. She was terrified. Being terrified doesn't make you less brave. Sometimes it makes you more brave. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the prairie. In the distance, a coyote howled wild and free and unafraid. Jacob, Mercy said suddenly, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night? If you'd just ridden past without speaking to me? No, he said firmly. I don't wonder about that. Why not? Because I believe some things are meant to be. You needed someone to see your worth, and I needed someone to show me what real strength looked like. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. We were meant to find each other, Mercy, and we were meant to build this life together. As if summoned by their conversation, Tommy appeared at the porch steps, rubbing sleepy eyes. Mama, Mercy? I had a bad dream. Come here, sweetheart, Mercy said, shifting to make room for him on the swing. Tell us about it. I dreamed I was lost again, and nobody came looking for me. Jacob's arm tightened around the boy's shoulders. That's never going to happen, son. You're home now. We'll always come looking for you. Promise. Promise, Mercy and Jacob said together, as they sat their husband, wife, babies, and chosen son, watching the stars while overhead. Mercy thought about promises. The promise Jacob had made her that first night. Stay with me forever. The promise she'd made him. Forever. The promises they made every day to the women and children who came through their doors. You are safe. You are valued. You are home. Some promises were easy to make but hard to keep. Others were hard to make but became easier with time. The best promises Mercy had learned were the ones that grew stronger the longer you lived them. Forever, she whispered into the night, the word carrying all her love, all her gratitude, all her hope for the future. Forever, Jacob whispered back, and in that moment, with her family safe in her arms and the haven full of women discovering their own worth, Mercy Stone knew that some dreams really do come true, especially the ones you're brave enough to fight for. The stars above Nebraska territory sparkled like diamonds, and all was well in the world that love had built.